You're watching Breakthrough News.
I'm Charlotte Tin-Hohenstein and you're watching Breakthrough News on BTR today. On today's show, we're talking about Broadway's audiences. Does the musical theatre capital of the world need to make a better effort to attract heteronormative male audiences? Here to discuss this is Tony Award-winning Broadway producer and director and playwright Andy Samberg, and Austin Pendleton, Broadway and off-Broadway actor, director, and playwright. So this year, there's been particularly a lot of articles on this topic of the fact that Broadway's audiences seem to be overwhelmingly female, and if not female, then gay men, and that this just sort of is this demographic that producers can't really shake. And there was a statistic that from 2012 to 2013, 68% of the audience was female, and 82% of the men who went only went because someone else was buying the ticket for them, be it their partner or a friend. Austin, you've been in this business since the 60s. You've been acting, directing. You've worked with everyone, including Meryl Streep, Ethan Hawke. You directed Elizabeth Taylor on Broadway. Is this the case in your eyes? Has it always been this way?
It's more obviously that now. You're more aware of it. I think men are more, there are two things. First of all, I don't know how to put this, but to put it, a lot of people don't take theater as seriously as they used to. They go, or at least men don't. So when there was high seriousness about the theater, which was still somewhat prevailing when I first came into the professional theater in New York, the men would be energized by, we're going for, this is a thing you do. Mm-hmm. It's like going to a symphony.
High culture.
Yeah, and they would get held by that. They would. Now the theater is often profoundly serious on Broadway, off-Broadway, but it doesn't have the reputation as a serious event that it used to have. That doesn't mean it's not as serious, in some ways even more serious, but it doesn't have that cachet around it that it used to. So that doesn't hold the men. Men, in my experience, and particularly men I don't know, the men I know tend to be men, either straight or gay, who really like to go to the theater. They're either theater people or
which would make sense.
They really like to go to the theater.
Right.
Know? But when I direct a show, often I go in the men's room on intermission, particularly if we're in previews and I'm trying to collect opinions. I go and sit in a stall, and nobody knows I'm there. So even if somebody I know happens to be in the men's room, they don't know I'm in there. Mm. And you hear what the men really feel.
So you are going out of your way to eavesdrop, Austin.
Yeah. And you're eavesdropping in a way that no one knows you're doing it.
Right, of course.
And you hear the real stuff. You hear like, pause. So what do you think? Or often they just don't talk about the play at all. But they don't sound excited about anything. Mm-hmm. Or you hear pause. So what do you think? I don't know. My wife won't let me leave. Or my wife insisted that we come. We come to if it's a nonprofit, she insists on a subscription or whatever. I don't know. You hear that a lot when you're in the men's room. In a way, it skews your sense of how the show is going over that you're directing, in the opposite way from when it gets skewed by you go out with your friends and they tell you it's wonderful. Right. And then you have no idea what they say once you've left, you know. Mm. But this, in a way, is you don't hear a good word in the men's room.
Interesting.
But that doesn't mean your show is in trouble because it's the women who wanted to come.
Right.
Or the gay men who want to come. Not that a gay man never goes into the bathroom. They all sound like straight men, though.
Right. Okay. I don't know what that means, but
yeah, I have no idea what I mean by that.
But we won't. Let's not.
They don't sound enthusiastic.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Andy, you're a producer. Is this something that you think about, trying to specifically attract straight guys to the theater?
Well, it's certainly, we want shows that appeal to as broad an audience as possible, especially if it's going to be something that's going to have an open-ended long run and a successful life. I mean, the first thing you look at as a producer when deciding what to mount is a show that you connect with personally, and then you have to weigh the questions of, is there a commercial audience? If it's Broadway, is there also a tourist audience? You know, a lot of factors go into that. Casting often plays a role in, you know, who you're targeting as your demographics. You know, am I getting someone who's an action hero from all the Marvel movies, you know, or am I getting someone who all the women will swoon over, or am I getting both, like a Denzel Washington? So at the same time, I think more important than the fact that more women are in attendance, I think the higher statistic is probably that more women are driving the purchases. So if a family is making a decision about what to do and it's going to be an evening in the arts, it is often women. And there are also similar statistics that say planning big vacations. It's the women of the household in a larger family that are planning those kinds of things. You know, maybe not every little detail of every outing, but if it's going to be a big purchase and an evening out that requires some kind of focus and planning, that has traditionally been more of the female's role. But at the same time, that's not to say there aren't men and straight men who come to the theater and love shows and get swept up in it, but it's not necessarily what is on the immediate radar. Hard to explain why. I mean, I think there is that, you know, historical, you know, look at high school, right? All the women will sign up to audition for the play. 4 of the guys will, because they're too cool to do the play. That's not really, it's not really normal. Why would I want to do the play when I can do the sports team? It sounds cliched and totally sexist and homophobic to say that, but it's still out there. But there are shows that have succeeded in reaching broader male demographics. Jersey Boys probably being a prime example. It's a big old splashy musical theater piece, but because that music is popular among male audiences, I think that really hit the zeitgeist. And that way, when their wives suggest it, the men are more excited to go instead of saying, why don't you take your girlfriend or one of the kids? But I would bet you it's still the women driving the sales for Jersey Boys.
Interesting. Austin, what about the comparison between film and theater? Because of course,
what about it?
Of course, now there's so much competition for entertainment, and I'm sure especially for guys, if you want to see something really epic and with a ton of like violence or sex and, you know, all that kind of stuff, I'm sure there are limits to what the stage can offer.
Yeah,
you know, that. As well as the fact that it is much more expensive to go to the theater. Do you think that there's perhaps a trap in Broadway shows trying to compete with films?
Well, I think there is, but that's just me. That's me being precious. I mean, you know, I a few years ago, I went to see some stupid Broadway show. I mean, I've seen a lot since, but this particular stupid Broadway show. There are Broadway shows, of course, that are extraordinary. There always have been,
right,
and there still
course.
are.
Yeah.
But there's also stupid ones.
Yeah.
Coming out of a stupid one matinee, I think I was a Tony voter, and it was just stupid. I won't say what it was. Don't say what it was. It was worthless and boring.
Okay.
But it was very elaborately staged and with some imagination in the staging. Coming out, one woman said to the other, you know what I love about Broadway? And the other one said, what? The first one said, the effects. I thought, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so sad. Broadway used to be where you'd come and hear great stories enacted by great actors. And now she said, you know what I love about Broadway, and that was what it was.
Yeah.
So they'd had a wonderful afternoon at this stupid show that had imaginative and successful effects. They got it fairly close to what you would experience in a movie.
Yeah. Andy.
Sorry about that.
No. As a producer, is that also something that you have to deal with? Trying to make something that would draw someone away from a film that would compete in that way, or do you specifically try and create something entirely different?
I don't necessarily see it as direct competition. I mean, yes, there's a lot of movies to musical adaptation, but they're here's the thing, there's also the age demographic that's hugely different. Theater is a much more expensive medium. You can go to a movie for, depending where you live, maybe $8 or $9. In New York, it's 15, but that's a different story. Theater, you're spending $150 for a top price ticket. Some people are spending $250, $300, $400 for the premium tickets. And even at discount prices, you're still spending, a few movie tickets worth just to sit in a bad seat. So not that they all have bad seats, but even just, the cheapest seats are more expensive than being down prime center best seat of a movie theater. So it's, I think that's why movies are skewing to a younger audience, because younger audiences can afford to drop $14 on a Friday night. College kids can't necessarily afford to do that on Broadway. Even some of the student pricing on Broadway is absurd. It's like in the $35, $40 range for a lot of Broadway shows, which has gone up from $20 only 10 years ago. So I think it's hard for me to see them as being in direct competition. Certainly the Broadway industry is trying to lure tourists and audiences to keep coming and keep believing in it, but they are different mediums. I mean, as Austin was saying, I think the best theater is story-driven, writer-driven, dialogue and performance-driven. That's not to say there aren't films that don't fill all those quotas as well, but film is a more visual medium, much even down to the writing. The screenplays are as much about how the director, wants to shape them. There's the original screenplay, and then there's the shooting script, which are, different beasts. In theater, there is one script that, the actors use. It's the one that gets published and sold in a bookstore and studied in high schools. So, the design is there to embellish and certainly, hopefully, in a good world, enhance, not distract from the text on stage. But I think in film, more often the production and spectacle are priority. Not always. Again, very broad generalizations here.
Well, we will take a quick break for a brief excerpt from this week's episode of Serious Business featuring Vulture Shit.
Hear your dad say, go to the ice truck, get me a choco taco. Hear your dad say, respect your mother, can't yell at her. Hear your dad say, get off the TV, there's football on. Hear your dad say, go to your room, 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 go to your room.
We're back with our discussion on Broadway's audiences. Austin, even if this trend is never going to be reversed, the audiences are always just going to be either predominantly female, or the guys who go are just, going to please the partner that they're with. Do you think it matters? Because you were saying that it's kind of always been this way earlier. Do you think that we need to be trying to reverse this trend?
Do you know the cartoonist Helen Hawkinson?
Nope.
She drew cartoons for the New Yorker, and she died tragically in a plane crash in the early 1950s. But she would make all these cartoons about women going to the theater and taking their husbands. They're just exquisite. And that was the golden age of theater, comparatively. And so I think it's never reversed itself, and it never will. I think men, at the end of a day, often like to, this is a total uninformed generalization, but just observation, they like to, if they're going to go out, they like to sit in a bar, a sports bar, maybe see a game going on, and hang out with the other guys, then talk and look some more at the screen. Or if a movie's on, they'll look at it. Or they'll be at home watching a movie, and they'll pause it, and they'll do something else. And all that. Women seem to, total generalization this is, women like...
But the stats do kind of are quite extreme.
Women love to escape into a story, often a very challenging story. When I directed Three Sisters at CSC 3 years ago, now this was a big hit, men frequently wanted to leave at the intermissions of that. And sometimes they did, but not without a fight.
I couldn't get a ticket.
Yeah, right, yeah. And I kept thinking, there are people who really want to see this. Why did these women have to bring their husbands?
Right.
Husbands don't want to be here. And you'd hear at the end of an act, can I go home? No, you may not. And then finally, either the husband or the wife would win. And if the wife or the husband would sit in abject misery, and again, from the stall in the men's room, you'd hear him bitching about it at the intermission. She won't let me leave. Who needs this shit? And all that. But the women were really into and it's a complex story. And they were really wanting to track it through and see what happened and stay on the horse with it, And that now the other kinds of men who came alone, or men who were in the theater world or the entertainment world, but really in it, they had no trouble with it, nor did the gay men. I mean, the gay men and the theater men didn't all just love it, but they were engaged. They wanted to be there.
Right. Okay.
And then they wanted to be there if only to hate it, if they happened to hate it.
But they wanted in it, and they wanted
to
an
encounter
opinion
the
on it.
event.
Right.
But often, not always, but often men who were taken there by their wives would say, why do we have to, you'd hear the phrase, why do we have to keep doing this? Why can't you just come and bring one of your friends or something?
Well, I'm currently producing Realistic Joneses, which is a Will Eno play, and Will is a phenomenal.
Congratulations!
Thanks, Austin. Thank you. And it's been very well reviewed. And Will Eno is a phenomenal playwright, but who hasn't previously had his work on Broadway. So it's a very different audience. And admittedly, a lot of the audience members are coming because of who's in our cast. It's Toni Collette. It's Michael C. Hall, who a lot of the male audiences know. Oh, Dexter. It's right. Marissa Tomei and Tracy Letts, who is a beloved theater artist, but who, television and film audiences have only gotten to know recently through Homeland, though a phenomenal actor. And one of my favorite moments in the play, there's a moment the two men have a scene together, and they sort of say, "Amen," and shake their head. And you can hear the men in the audience react to that laugh more strongly because they sort of know themselves, and we can all sort of laugh it off. And you can imagine these two guys who, not that this is what they're talking about, but if they were ever talking to their wives about going to the theater, they'd just, why don't we want to go? Oh man, it's like you could apply that to so many things. And Will, in his rather smart and complex play, puts this in there so simply, and it's a wonderful moment between Michael Hall and Tracy Letts.
A sense of camaraderie.
Yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. It's just the two guys, shooting the shit, if you will, and that they would never think to go to the theater. Not again, that's not even the topic of conversation. But as a theater person myself, that's one of the ways I look at that moment and that scene.
Andy, Realistic Joneses is super exciting. I was going to ask a question that doesn't seem to actually apply to this particular production, about getting too tunnel visioned from the producing side of things, and strategizing too much about trying to reach these different demographics. And certainly nowadays there always seems to be a celebrity in the show if it's going to go anywhere. And whether or not you can get too hung up on this. The Realistic Joneses seems to be star-studded and artistically hugely successful. So
we have what I'd say is, thank you. But I'd say it is a rarity. I mean, to have, quite frankly, it is this cast that has made it possible for Will Eno's wonderful play to make it to Broadway. But at the same time, it was the play that the producing team initially fell in love with, and then cast it appropriately for a Broadway audience that would also appeal to broader tourist markets. But the play was already there. It wasn't like it was, let's produce a play because these four actors want to throw something together. It was, we have this wonderful play, let's bring it to these four wonderful actors. And in our case, these are not four untested stage actors. These are four actors who happen to have found success in Hollywood, but they all have their roots in the theater. They've all been Broadway, off-Broadway. They've done it all. They've come from Chicago, all different places. So these are not people who this is a foreign scene for, where we were coming in going, okay, we're throwing stars in, but they're completely untested stage actors, which does happen. There are wonderful film actors who have trouble adapting and vice versa. But we came in, thankfully, knowing that wasn't the risk here. And we had a play that we believed in. So you can get tunnel vision. You can oh, it's all about doing what this actor wants to do and finding a way to make it happen, and you're writing something that may not live up to the standards because you're rushing to get a play on Broadway that features so-and-so in the cast. But, and it's unfortunate when that happens, and sometimes, though, the sad truth is those are some of the things that make money, while there are wonderful plays without stars on Broadway that don't. Off-Broadway, I still believe in as a valuable and viable medium that is not as star-dependent, but that's because it's not as tourist-dependent.
Mm.
So there's a whole other discussion we could have on star casting and Broadway versus off-Broadway, but I know we only have limited time.
Yeah, and we will actually have to stop there. I'm certainly hoping to get a ticket to Realistic Joneses at some point. Thank you so much, Andy and Austin, for joining me today. To continue the conversation, share your thoughts with us on Twitter at Breakthrough News. We'll be right back in a moment after this quick excerpt from a very special episode of Live Studio featuring Kishi Bashi performing live at this year's South by Southwest Festival in Austin, Texas. Thank you.
When candy was a remedy, we'd make it up, we destroy ourselves in the yard, the yard. I held you in a wooden place, I was hungry then, it was ours before it went dark, went dark. Oh, Wonder Woman, wonder me, you bewitched me with your golden blue from the start, the start. King Kong Kong, Kane Kong, King Kong Kong.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and this is Breakthrough News, an independent news show for the free-thinking web. We bring you a range of voices on the issues that today's generation is thinking about. Be sure to check out breakthroughradio.com through the weekend for our continued Folk Week coverage, including an in-depth report on the new trend of beard transplants sweeping the hipster and Hasidic communities of New York City. That's it for what's breaking through the news today. Tell us what's breaking through your world on Twitter at Breakthrough News. I'm Charlotte Hohenstein, and thank you for joining us.